welcome to the Culinary Saijiki podcast. My name is Allison Whipple, and twice a month I'll bring you a conversation with a fellow haiku practitioner about the way that food and the seasons show up in their haiku practice. Visit www.culinarysaijiki.com to listen to the podcast, read long-form essays on these topics, and sign up to join the podcast conversation. You can also support the project at buymeacoffee.com/culinarysaijiki. Enjoy the show. Welcome everybody to episode 10 with Peter Schmidt. It is currently Halloween night as I'm recording this, and I've just finished being part of our neighborhood's trick-or-treat festivities, which were wonderful. After most of my adult life in apartments or in places without like a big Halloween, just like not a lot of kids in the neighborhood, it was super exciting. John and I got our lawn chairs and we just sat on the front stoop and passed out candy. Astrid was dressed up as a hot dog, so a little pit bull hot dog, super duper cute. It was just a lovely time, and I'm glad the weather was nice and we could sit and hang out and meet more of our neighbors. Before I get into the rest of the episode, thank you MA Dubs for the 3 coffees. I'm now 35% of my way toward having my web hosting costs covered for the year. I'm super stoked about that. And another housekeeping thing, we have an extra Tuesday in November, so I'm going to do a community blog post. We did one of those back in May. And it's the similar setup, 1 to 5 haiku. This time the theme is harvest. And I always like to encourage people to not use the theme word. Certainly you're welcome to. I'm not going to stop you. I'm just going to say, know your editor. And as an editorial preference, I'm always intrigued by the ways people can incorporate the theme without using the actual theme word. That submission will be via Google form. There will be a link to that in the show notes. Deadline is Wednesday, November 23rd, 11:59 p.m. Central Time. And I'll let you know by Sunday the 27th which ones I've accepted. And non-English language haiku are okay. Please provide a translation. I am one of those Americans who is really only fluent in English, sad to say. And experimental haiku, also welcome. Just be mindful, for those of you who don't do a lot of editing, it can be really hard to format some of that experimental stuff for the internet. So I will welcome it, I'll read it, but take mercy on your poor editor who has to format all of that stuff, please. Anyway, this episode is with Peter Schmidt. I actually recorded with him and MA Dubs on the same afternoon, just within about an hour and a half of each other. So actually you'll hear some of my conversation sort of refers back to that earlier recording. Peter and I have never met in real life, but after we recorded, he reminded me we had first connected on the now defunct Google Plus social network, which, so we've known each other in the digital space for a long time. And it's been so long that I had forgotten how we had encountered each other. But it was there, and that was great to be reminded of that, because I was one of those people that really loved that particular social network, and I was sad to see it go. Anyway, I had a super fun time talking with Peter. We definitely got into some real nerdy stuff. It was a lot of fun. I think we diverged from poetry a fair amount, but to me, it's all connected. It all comes back to poetry. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. All right. Peter H. Schmidt is a poet, pilot, entrepreneur, executive, volunteer, and vocalist. An MIT-educated engineer, he's strived to balance the classical / analytical and romantic / synthetic throughout his life and work. He is currently working 7 days a week on his latest startup, Transcend Air, which will put the speed and convenience back into air travel for everyone. And goodness, I hope so, because unless I have to cross a whole ocean or a whole continent, I would really. I don't love commercial air travel.
Oh, exactly. Well, and we're going to fix that.
I really hope you do, because I would love to enjoy flying again.
Well, that's what gets me out of bed 7 days a week. So,
Well, good. I'm glad. All right, you want to read your first two haiku?
cinnamon mustache quenched in Macintosh cider. Sunset warms donut. Cinnamon mustache quenched in Macintosh cider. Sunset warms donut. From cup to my veins, caffeine tornadoes swirl up molecules to mind. From cup to my veins, caffeine tornadoes swirl up molecules to mind.
In the first one, and so these are beverage. To me, these are sort of beverage ones, so that's why I grouped them
Yep.
together. But as with so many of the people who come on this show, so many of I could group them in so many ways. I feel like all of y'all do a really great job of picking things that all just fit together in really interesting ways. But I picked these because these were beverages. But I love the way you turned cinnamon into a verb.
A verb.
Yeah. Do you have any like comments on how you came up with that, or how that aesthetic decision worked?
Well, one of my favorite things about the English language is you can verb any word. It's legal.
Yeah.
Some people might disapprove of it, but it's something that I like and make use of.
Yeah, I think there's an old one. There's an old Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that actually talks about that, and I'll have to see if I can dig that up and put that in the show notes.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I also in this first one, I saw a not necessarily a repeated, but like a complementary circular imagery where like, and I think about the sort of the milk mustache or the hot cocoa mustache, and it's sort of like a ring
Yeah,
around your mouth. But then we've got the donut image at the end. So while there's not necessarily a directly mentioned circle in the first line, there's the implication of it, and I think that becomes a lot stronger when we also think about that sun warmed donut nearby.
yeah, that's a great point. And there's also the rim of the cider cup.
Yeah.
There's a circle in here too.
Yeah. I was just talking to another poet earlier today. This is a big recording day, and I was talking about I'm back in the Midwest and very excited for to be able to have a decent apple cider again. Because let me tell you, the apple cider options in Texas were sad.
Oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
So, bonus.
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited. I'm drinking tea right now, so I actually am. I'm like I have got my tea, and I've got my round cup, and then it's also like the tea is steaming up, and so that's actually sending me to your second haiku, and I don't know if the caffeine tornado necessarily refers to the steam from the coffee so much, because it doesn't we don't always get that nice swirl. So
True.
there's like two sort of, and I always come to two readings. There's my first reading where I'm like, oh, steam, but then I'm thinking, no, maybe it's also just like the fury with which the caffeine is like cycling through your system and sort of turning your
Exactly.
brain on.
Well, that's really where it came from. And also, I was trying to come up with an image for power, a
Mm.
compact image for power, because that's what I get out of caffeine in these cases. Um, and the I started with wind up instead of swirl up, because like winding a clock, powering it up. But I liked swirl better. I liked the way it sounded, and it was more evocative of a real tornado to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I never got to see these that often, but in um, Lake Erie, which is near where I grew up, there would be these, they weren't really tornadoes, but they were these
Water spouts.
water spouts. Oh, so
Yeah,
fascinating. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I only got to see one in Lake Michigan, but it was really pretty cool.
So cool. But that's also a little bit what it makes me think of like the power of that like liquid like swirling up, and it paints a, it's clearly not a literal picture, right? That's not how caffeine works. That's not how coffee works. Um, but I appreciate like the way that um, I think that might be a little like, I think what your haiku is getting at is just sort of how it, to me, it's how it feels. That's how it feels to like
Right.
take that first sip, and then this is audio, but like I'm going hunched over and I'm like sitting up a little more like a robot coming to life. And I really appreciate the way in that poem you really tried to, um, again, like you talked about in your bio, balancing the analytical with the less analytical. And I think this is a really great example of uh, busting out of that analytical understanding of coffee.
Yeah. Well, and the other part about that is analytical is caffeine. In the case we think of it in terms of coffee, is much more of it's a high level abstraction. We're not really thinking about the molecule caffeine and the biochemical action. We've taken it as a shortcut for the sort of stimulant effects and the concentration benefits. There's a cultural aspect to it when you say talk about caffeine, and that connects to mind. And mind is an emergent property of biology. It is not a biological thing. So that was intentional as well.
I'm going to now ask you to clarify a couple of terms for our listenership. What do you mean when you say mind is not an emergent property? I kind of know what that means, but I'm not going to assume that everyone listening to this show
Sure.
knows what that's about.
So showing my geek
I
foundations.
I love it.
So mind is mysterious. Mind is a word that we feel we understand. We feel like we have minds, but when you try and define it, it becomes very slippery. And it's an active topic of research in psychology, philosophy, and cognitive neuroscience. And there's a view that everything is mechanical, and therefore mind must be an outcome of biological processes, and caffeine plays a role in that. And certainly that's part of the truth, but it's not a sufficient explanation for what makes us feel that we are a person, that we have an ego. And mindfulness is not something that I think is solely biological.
Okay, so if it's not solely biological, like I'm actually like very curious. I'm just like, tell me,
Yeah.
tell me more.
Well, so and perhaps you could eventually find pathways that would interpret it all as biology. But in the case of what makes a person is not just the biology going on in their body, it's the context that happens in. And in particular, it's the social and cultural context that happens in. Your mind emerges from biological activity in a context of your past actions and the current environment you're in, meaning that the people you associate with, for example, have a strong effect on how your mind works, actually, that thing we call mind. There's a great book called The Society of Mind by an MIT artificial intelligence researcher. And what limited his concept was his idea was that the biology created these little computing mechanisms inside your brain. So that's one level of abstraction higher than biology. And they would interact with each other. And it was the result of their interactions that created our sense of selves. And I always wanted to ask him, well, what about those entities in somebody else's brain and interacting with us? And we can influence each other unconsciously. It doesn't have to be through our egos and discussion, but just pheromones, postures. So all of that is kind of wrapped into this concept of the cultural idea of caffeine, how we use it, what we expect to get from it, and its effect on how we think and behave.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's actually it's now made me think of that that adage, "You are what you eat," and I'm like,
Yeah.
but it's, I mean, it is, but also like it's it's not just what you eat, right? And I think, that sort of gets oversimplified into like the idea of, I don't know, health food or whatever. Um,
or
and
toxins, quote unquote.
yeah, I mean, that that could be a whole thing unto
Yeah.
itself, right? Yeah, yeah, and granted, yes, toxins exist, but oh my god, not the way that
Right.
some people talk about them. Um, don't
Right.
get me on that
Exactly.
soapbox. But but it's also, I think, like how you eat, like how you prepare food, and the cultural context. The like that idea that you are what you eat, like it, we can take a really expansive definition of that, I think.
Right.
Yeah, so super fascinating.
That's the only thing that explains lutefisk, by the way.
Yes, I'm a very food positive person. I am pro eat whatever you want to eat. I do not understand lutefisk, but I'm just, I'm from the wrong part of the Midwest / Rust Belt.
Yeah.
I'm I'm just I'm not gonna get that one. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. I've concluded that it's a form of cultural allegiance,
And
and no one actually likes how it tastes, but they like being part of that
I know of
culture.
one person who liked how it tastes. A friend of mine, his father is in the last days of his life, and one of the things he wanted was a whole lutefisk spread, and the people at the home where he is a resident now put out a whole lutefisk spread, a thing that is, again, I've never really experienced one, so I imagine it's just like, I don't know, Midwestern lox. Like a big Midwestern lox buffet. And then apparently it was just like some of the happiest he's been in years. So I think there
Oh,
are
that's
people who legit like
all
it,
right.
you know.
That's terrific.
There are things, I mean, my dad and my sister both love peanut butter and pickle sandwiches, and I love those two things independently, but mashing them up together is a thing that I'll just, that's their shared food language, and
All right.
I'm on the outs on that one.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, everybody has their unique, weird things they like or dislike, and
Oh yeah, no,
and it's
people get like, I'm down for cold spaghetti for breakfast the next day, and there are people who are just like, what is
that does sound kind of horrifying, Allison.
I know. It sounds horrifying to everyone, but I think me and my mother. So I guess that's me and my mother's shared food language. All right, do you want to read your next two?
All right. Chocolate sundae. Hot fudge sun melts ice cream breeze. Scoop of May in June. Chocolate sundae. Hot fudge sun melts ice cream breeze. Scoop of May in June. Turkey, dressing, corn, gravy cratered potato peaks. Cranberry bites back. Turkey, dressing, corn, gravy cratered potato peaks. Cranberry bites back.
And the challenge of having an audio podcast, and especially because I don't put the poems in the show notes. That's sort of an editorial choice that I made, but so the reader cannot see that in your chocolate sundae haiku you've got a little wordplay in there, and so instead of Sunday Sundae, referring to the dessert, you have it Sunday Sunday. So I'm curious about your choice to invoke that sense of wordplay there.
Well, it came from a couple of things. One is the this came from a direct personal experience. This haiku narrates something I did. It was a Sunday in June, hot day in the sun, and I went and got my favorite chocolate Sunday AE on a Sunday AY. Right around the same time, you were looking for a haiku about food at the change of seasons, and so all those things came together. And the other aspect of it was I wanted to make it both about time and about food. And so the use of the day word made it a time based when you read it and can see the words, because it's both, right? We talk about hot fudge sun and an ice cream breeze. That could be literally hot fudge and the sun's a metaphor, or it could be hot fudge, the sun's real and the hot fudge is a description of it. So I tried to make it go both ways.
That's That is the challenge, and I think that is, for me at least, and I think all of us who practice haiku, we all develop our own sets of preferences. But for me, I really like when a line can go both ways, or when a poem can be read multiple ways. I think, in fact, I like that just because I always I invariably read something and interpret it a way that is totally different from what the author intended, and then I'm like, well, but it could go either way, so I feel smart.
Well, I find in the writing, I'm not a very intentional poet. Um, the part of me that makes poetry doesn't communicate uh, directly with the part of me that does analysis.
Mhm.
So I find I have to analyze my own poems afterwards, and sometimes I find out it means something other than what I thought it did, which sounds weird and I hope not pretentious, but it's literally what happens.
Sure. And then your Thanksgiving poem. Well, to me, it's a Thanksgiving poem.
Oh,
I guess
absolutely.
I'm like, well, a lot of these foods are, I guess, eaten at other winter holidays, I suppose. But I don't know. To me, turkey is Thanksgiving, and other things are Christmas. Um,
Yes, me too.
um, so um, I know that you said in your email that you appreciate the challenge of the 575. Um,
Yep.
and I think you do that. It is definitely a challenge and a constraint that I think you do really well. And so I'm interested in what your take is on why you value the 575 constraint. Like, what challenge? How does that particular tool speak to you? Like, what do you get out of that when you approach haiku?
Um, it's interesting. Restrictive forms like haiku bound the possibilities in ways that I find useful. Um, I like rising to challenges. It's also why I love prompts. You've shared several really interesting poem prompts that awakened ideas for me to go work on. It does happen. It does happen that the muse strikes. I'll be sitting somewhere and a poem will start to form, and I'll have to write it down. But I often go do better if presented with this challenge, and so that's what I like about haikus. I would have to say that haikus are the hardest form for me. I haven't tried. I shouldn't say that. I haven't actually done a lot of sonnets. Sonnets are hard too, but there's so much more freedom with having more words to work with. Trying to get something that is interesting, perhaps a little surprising, perhaps fun in this few syllables I think it's cool if you can pull it off. And I really admire poets who are good at it.
Yeah, it is challenging. I would say sonnets and haiku are um, challenging in different ways. By the way, for anyone who heard the sound of the door, my partner came in from the Soulard market and brought me a delicious pineapple boba. They have a boba stand, and this pineapple boba is just
Oh, nice.
and it doesn't have any dairy in it, which, I mean, one of the things I love about boba is normally the sweetened condensed milk, but they make this one like dairy free, and it is so refreshing, and it's like a pina colada without the alcohol, and it's so nice.
Cool. Are you multi beveraging now?
I
Is
have
that your
finished my oolong
situation?
tea, but yeah, I'm a multi beverage person. I go into work every day and I have my half gallon of water. I will not carry a full gallon bottle because that makes you like one of those fitness
Freak.
weirdos. Yeah, I'm like, so gallon is too much. So I carry my half gallon water, and then I've got my Texas Bucky's mug full of hot
Oh
tea,
yeah.
and then I've got um, I'll either have coffee or maybe a protein smoothie or something. There's free coffee at work, so I usually don't bother bringing coffee to work anymore. But like, I get like my protein smoothie for my extra snack because I'm always hungry by 10 a.m. But
Right.
I'm definitely a three beverage person.
That's a great system. That's very foreign to me. I only learned that there were people who lived that way recently, and then so when I heard you talking about tea and saw the boba, I had to ask.
Yeah, no, I'm a multitask beverage person. Anyway, and I always, whenever anyone mentions sonnets, I think about the poet Nathan Brown, who he is a person who has just written a new poem every day for, I don't know, over a decade at least. It's
Yep.
probably longer. I don't even remember how long it's been. Um, The last time he talked about this was almost, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago. So, and it had probably been 10 years at that point, if not 20, who's to say. Anyway, he is prolific. And he's once spent a whole year writing a new sonnet every day. And he at one point was a songwriter in Nashville. And, I'm not going to get the quote directly because it's been so long, but he said something to the effect of the hardest form of verse is the form of a Nashville hit song. Yeah. Those are so constrained. But he said, sonnets are tough. Are sonnets harder than haiku? I don't know. I think it sort of depends what your tendencies are. I think haiku they're super challenging. I think the challenge of haiku is, for me, first of all, it's, they're so short. And also there's such a rich cultural tradition that in the United States or in the English language world, we kind of can't quite get right, or it's hard to map on. And there are so many elements. There's the kigo or the season word. There's the kireji or the cutting word. There's juxtaposition. There's contrast. And I'm like, are these two different things? I don't know. I don't think they are, but some people think they are. There's the idea of how wordplay should come in and whether it should come in and when it should come in. And there's so much you can potentially pack in. And that's challenging. And I think for me with sonnets, the hard part was, despite the fact that I studied music and dance, it was really hard for me to get the rhythm of a sonnet. It was really hard for me to actually feel poetic meter. I don't know why, because again, I studied music, I studied dance, you'd think, but I could never hear it unless there was like a melody behind it. And so I think that was the challenge for me. And so that's, to me, I think why sonnets are so challenging is, I think a really good sonnet either, makes good use of the meter, or it, messes with the meter in a way that's compelling. And that's not a thing I could ever do especially well.
Do you feel the meter? Do you feel the rhythm in Shakespeare's speeches?
No.
That doesn't come through there either?
And this is unpopular opinion. We're just getting, this is going to be this Allison soapbox episode. It has nothing to do with food. But I always, I had to read so many Shakespeare plays in college as an English major. And I'm like, the poems that were just, sonnets, standalone sonnets, great, lovely, intriguing. The plays, literally, it just meant nothing to me. Like, and if I watched it, if I saw it on the stage, I'm like, oh, I get it now. But just to read a play on a page,
it's very two-dimensional.
It doesn't nothing at all. And so people are like, why don't you have an appreciation for Shakespeare? I'm like, because I couldn't watch every single play I had to read.
Well, my experience was it took me decades of life experience before I had enough internal resources to resonate with what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And I'm not claiming to get it all yet, for that matter.
Sure.
But high school, I too was left kind of flat by reading a couple plays I had to read in high school advanced English. And now I love it. We actually host a couple of Shakespeare parties a year where we have people in and we do cold read-throughs. And most of the people have no ability to read expressively.
Yeah.
It's fun, but a little painful at times. But it's interesting. I tried to write some stuff in the style of, just for fun with some friends, in the style of Shakespeare dialogue and words. And they thought it sounded really cool. I thought it sounded really cool. And then I went and mapped out the meter. Mm-hmm. And I found out that I wasn't using iambic pentameter like Shakespeare did. I was using Dr. Seuss meter.
But hey, it sounded good.
Yeah, well, we liked it because we grew up with more Dr. Seuss than Shakespeare.
We did. So. Yeah. And I will get us back to food and haiku eventually, but I'm sort of loving where this is going. But that makes me actually think of, I was in a focus group for, I probably shouldn't say who. I don't think I signed an NDA, but I'll just say I was in a focus group, for like a series of planners, and they're like, which title do you like better? And there's a set of like 5, and I was the odd one. I was kind of the odd one out, is like I liked one that was a little different, and I'm like, why do I like this one better? Why do I like this one better? And I actually did figure out, I'm like, oh my god, I think it sounds better because it's in iambic pentameter. And they're like, everyone in the focus group, like they're like, people writing it, they're like, what? And I'm like, okay, so let me go and explain poetry here.
First, let's talk about a foot.
Mhm. Like, I know you have not had to think about this since 11th grade, but
Right.
that was a fun moment. I'm like, well, good. I have now made use of that,
Yeah.
that degree. Anyway, now that we have, digressed, you've got our next two, and especially the second one and this next two, I'm super excited to talk about.
All right. Flame licks icicle. Steam rises as droplets fall. Tongues dance greedily. Flame licks icicle. Steam rises as droplets fall. Tongues dance greedily. Rusty fist of war. Our plowshares will beat iron into amber fields. Rusty fist of war. Our plowshares. Hold on, I gotta redo this one because a software install pop-up just popped up over my Haiku. Rusty fist of war. Our plowshares will beat iron into amber fields.
All right, and I put these two together. I'd say I put them together because they are related to other aspects of food beyond food itself. So this first one, this is a personification of eating, and so I thought that was just a super like, this is a very intense. These are also super intense. These two poems, super intense. So how did you so you said you don't feel you're an intentional poet. You have to go back and analyze your own writing. So for this first one of the flame consuming the icicle, was that something, do you remember that you had to go back and find in the revision process?
A bit. Icicle started out as popsicle, believe it or not.
Oh.
And I just felt that made it a little cheap, to be perfectly honest. Putting in the actual food item made it a little too on the nose. And so I substituted in icicle. And again, I tend to think visually, especially with haiku. I try to compose by picturing the image and then putting words to it. And then there was, this was one I revised a fair amount as I went back through it. I wanted to evoke, as you said, the process of eating. Fire consuming is like fire eating. And water putting out fire is like your appetite being quenched through eating. And the better you like something, certainly for me, the more greedily I feel, the more I want to quench that appetite by diving in. So there's that. And there are other connotations you can take from this as well, I realized, and that was something I realized after I read it through all the way. Because this could be read also as a sexual metaphor.
It was definitely, I didn't personally, I didn't read it as sexual, but definitely sensual, which to me, those are different things. But like, again, it's a short poem, and it could definitely be read that way as well.
It wasn't where I started from, but I decided to leave it that way.
Sure. That's always, and I love that even with haiku, that was one of the things when I did write primarily longer forms, how sometimes you could surprise yourself. And I do like that even though haiku is short, there is still that opportunity to surprise yourself.
Yeah, I think I'm surprised more often than not, honestly.
Well, I think that's good. I think that keeps it interesting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and then in the second one in this series, it has some agricultural elements that come in. But you also included a note that I asked you not to read because I didn't want you to give it away. And I actually did uh, find out. I listened to the most recent Haiku P podcast episode on Haibun, where the presenter, who I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on the name, but he talked about how these prefatory notes, or these sort of like little afterword notes about the like sort of occasion of the haiku, used to be quite common. And that was something that was new to me. That was something I did not know before. So I thought it was super interesting when I was sitting down to prep all of these and like pick out which ones I wanted to include on the show. I was like, oh, here's one with like a little prefatory note, like they just talked about on the podcast.
Well, I'm glad that came up right then. I haven't studied haikus diligently, but I've read a fair amount of haikus, and some of the collections I've read had little notes like that.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was a thing.
I mean, it was. I think it's maybe, again, like just a thing that doesn't come up in English language haiku very much for whatever reason, or it doesn't come up in in the contemporary world, for better or for worse. But I learned this week that used to be a thing.
All right. Well, my collection of Richard White haikus, who I love.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Yes, and I think they're Richard Wright.
Yes,
to get that right. Richard Wright haikus. Yeah, there were some of the ones in there had them, and so I think that was the prompt for me to say, oh, I can make this clear.
Yes.
So,
well, if you would like to, and I'll link to this, and I'll try to remember to link to this in the show notes. But that episode about the importance of haibun, it actually he talks so much about just sort of the history of haiku, and talks about so many things I didn't know, even though I've been studying this for a while. So if you want like a good crash course into some like real like historical stuff about the form, like everyone should go check that out. It is so fascinating.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, no, I'd love to read that or listen to that.
Yeah, listen to that. Anyway, your prefatory note said a future home on Mars. So why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, there's a lot in this haiku, and it really is the balancing between my classic and romantic sides. And in some ways it raises some troublesome issues that it all comes together. So, well, let's start with Rusty. People who aren't as nerdy as I am may not be aware that the reason Mars is red is that its surface is covered with iron oxide, otherwise known as rust. As we know, rust is reddish, and that's why the entire planet is red. Mars, of course, was the Roman name for the god of war, and so the planet itself is named after that. And so that's where Rusty Fist of War comes from. And that's also a sort of a challenging image. Then Amber Fields, skipping to the end, of course, that's the reference to Amber Fields of Grain from America the Beautiful, which is a sort of a triumphalist vision of the pioneer achievements of the white colonizing settlers of the United States. And so I grew up thinking that manifest destiny was a good thing, and that filling the Midwest with amber fields of grain was important. And that's both, in my current view, that's both right and wrong. There's the technical side of civilization's advanced, and if we weren't able to efficiently grow grain the way we are, we couldn't feed all the people we have. But certainly there's displaced Native American peoples who suffered mightily for that vision, that pioneering vision. The other aspect of this is the beginning of Star Trek. I'm a huge Star Trek fan. Beginning of Star Trek starts with space, the final frontier. And you have to ask what Roddenberry meant by frontier. And I think what Roddenberry meant by frontier is a challenging environment that only sort of the best, if you will, of humanity can survive. The pioneers, and I had family members who were pioneers in the plains in South Dakota, living in sod huts.
Rough.
They had a phrase back in the day, which is, the cowards never started and the weaklings died along the way, which is a sort of very Darwinian view.
Yes.
But I think Musk shares it. Elon Musk shares it, and he's striving with SpaceX his espoused reason for forming that company was to colonize Mars. And regardless of what you think of Musk in his probably 40% descent into billionaire Howard Hughes kind of madness now, that vision for humanity to have a long-term future in the universe, we do need to be living on more than one planet, because there are threats out there that will make planets unlivable. Whether we do it to ourselves or space rocks do it, either way. So I am in favor, ultimately, of humans surviving, and I'm ultimately in favor of colonizing Mars as part of that. So this idea of amber fields of grain growing on Mars is something I think is important. Then, of course, you get to the middle of the haiku, which our plowshares will be iron. So plowshares and swords made out of iron, planet Mars covered with iron. So talking about using plowshares, in this case, as a stand-in for all of the technology we've invented to foster human existence in hostile environments, and Mars will be one of the most hostile. To be able to use that technology, our plowshares, to make that habitable for humans is what that's about. So there's an essay on 3 lines of haiku.
I mean, that's so often what poetry commentary is about. It's a whole essay on something so short.
So yeah, and this is one of my favorites, just because it so cuts to so many things that I think are really important. I wouldn't be getting out of bed every day to try and make air transportation better for myself and for you and for humanity if I thought humanity had no worthy future. I still bear hope for us. It's hard some days, but I still do.
It is hard some days, and those who want to colonize Mars are welcome to it. But I just hope I can live out the rest of my days on Earth. I'm like, I like it here.
Yeah. Well, I would go to,
especially after having watched the series The Expanse. I know it's a book series. I haven't read it yet, but watching the TV series The Expanse,
yes,
I'm just like, you know what? No, I want to stick to Earth if possible, if at all possible, please.
I certainly understand that view, but I have to say, I would, if offered a slot, I would be on the first starship to Mars.
I hope it's
or
lovely.
Spaceship for the real technical people out there, but he calls it a starship.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, you want to read your last 2?
Yes. So, New City Solo, warm lighted corner cafe, hot onion soup hug. New City Solo, warm lighted corner cafe, hot onion soup hug. Angry words like smoke, dark wisps, burning ego, stench to my eyes. Angry words like smoke, dark wisps, burning ego, stench to my eyes.
I grouped these 2 together because, well, one is more about food and one is more about sensory experience. To me, they both really spoke to how sensory experience can make us feel connected or disconnected. So in the New City Solo, we've got the onion soup, and that's something that's very just very comfort. Like, even if you are alone, something about your bowl of favorite soup is incredibly comforting, and it's not even necessarily just the eating it, but it's like the warmth of it in the bowl. It's the smell of it. It's the memories it evokes.
Absolutely. And again, that one's from a personal experience. My first night in Paris, when I started working for a Paris-based software company. And I'm not a bold traveler. In unfamiliar environments, I'm uncomfortable until I can sort of get my bearings. And so the first night I was there, I sort of stumbled out of this little traditional Paris hotel and spoke very little French. Walked a half block to my left, and there on the corner was a little restaurant. It's Le Pré au Clair, and it's now my favorite place in Paris, which is now my favorite place on Earth, believe it or not, after 10 years. But I was lonesome that night, and I walked in not knowing what to expect. How would the waiters treat me? And in fact, they were super friendly, super nice, and sat me in a corner, and I ordered onion soup. soup à l'oignon. It's not French onion soup if you're actually in France.
No.
And they set down a little basket of cut up baguette chunks, which I dipped in the soup. And I finished up one of the baskets, and I went to dip my spoon in, and another basket magically appeared.
Ooh.
And I think, oh, good baguette. Oh my God, French made that day in Paris. Oh. So I ate that basket, and I picked up my spoon, and a third basket showed up. So I was on a carbohydrate high. And the restaurant itself is just super cozy and wonderful, and it's highly recommended. It's in Saint-Germain, and so if anyone's going to Paris who's listening to this, highly recommended. I tell everybody who's going to go, and all of my American friends who've gone and visited, many of them have gone back twice on their visit because they enjoyed it so much.
Well, if I ever make it to Paris, I'll have to check that out. And France is a place where I would order onion soup. I am loath to order someone's like the French onion soup is great at anywhere in the United States. I'm like, is it though? Like I have, having learned to make it myself and spent a couple of years like getting good at making it, I'm just like, is it though?
That's exactly the problem. You're probably got only about a 10-15% shot at it being really good here, unfortunately. But it's a real craft. So
it is. And that's why previously I've only made it once a year. I've gotten my technique down to the point where now I'm like, I'll probably up it to 2 or 3 times a year. But again, that's
great.
2 or 3, that's it.
Yeah. Did you buy a blowtorch for the cheese? That's my question.
No, I'm honestly a fan of just like doing it for a few seconds in the broiler. Yeah.
Well, that's good, but it's, you've got to get your timing right in the right spot in the broiler. That's the thing about that.
I let John handle that part. Actually, I make the soup all afternoon, and then I let him handle the topping part. And it's a team effort. Really.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah. So, I could talk about my French onion soup misadventures for days, but and then I'm like, oh, I should have reordered these because I always hate to end on like a darker poem. I mean, the world is full of darkness, so we can't shy away from it, but that's not what I want to end on. Again, here's another one that again is, it's not necessarily about like food or eating directly, but I think it speaks to the importance of how we consume food, we relate to food like not just through taste but through touch and scent and the way something looks, and it's really how the sensory experience really informs our whole world.
Well, and it's a very synesthetic experience, food is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have the look, you have the smell, you have the taste, the texture, it all combines. And one of the things I played with in this was, we don't smell with our eyes, but the way I'm affected in this situation, which is, this is really what was behind this was just my cumulative frustration with negativity in online forums, comment sections. And that's really, it struck me that my reaction to it was very visceral.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a bad odor. Just like, I can't with this. And a lot of the things that I find most offensive, I think, come down to this phenomenon of everybody's a keyboard warrior nowadays. Without the restraint of interpersonal interaction, ego comes to the fore. So,
indeed, I agree with that wholeheartedly. For sure.
But I still have hope for humanity despite that, because people like you learn how to make onion soup, and it's awesome.
It's probably not as good as it is in Paris, but it's...
Well, you never know. It's the thing I learned about Paris food is I thought it was meant to be fancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed up to Paris, and it turns out I went into other restaurant, and I ordered what I could figure out. I couldn't read much French then, so I ordered chicken and roast potatoes and some sort of green bean like vegetable, and I didn't have high expectations. Well, it was the best.
Oh yeah,
chicken and roast potato. I mean, it was amazing. It's just they've raised what is not fancy at all. It's just that they don't bother making bad food.
Yeah.
It's like you have to eat food. It could be bad or it could be good. Why would you make it bad?
And well, I think that speaks, I think so often we get caught up on something like, this is a classic, this is a super traditional dish, like whether it's French or Japanese or Brazilian or whatever. And it's like something like super elaborate. And it's like, yeah, that's super traditional at Christmas, but guess what? Everyone still just has to eat Tuesday night dinner, and Tuesday night dinner is gonna,
right.
It might look different in France and Brazil and Japan, but it's still Tuesday night dinner, and no one's like busting out all the stops just on a random weekday.
No, absolutely.
No.
But despite that, the French do it in a way where it's important to they'll take essentially as much care for that Tuesday night as you would for a holiday dinner here.
Yeah.
In the preparation. And I came to appreciate that. I had no appreciation for French culture before I showed up there. And now I get that. And it's also made me a bread snob.
Oh, I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
Yeah. And there are, when I first started working in Paris in 2001, and I worked there I worked from the US, but I visited 3 or 4 weeks a year. And over the decade that I was employed by this company, I saw some really interesting changes, one of which was the acceptance of English on signage and in advertising things. Like the French language police sort of got exhausted, I guess. One of the French hotel chains ran an entire ad campaign all in English to French people.
Whoa.
Because there was more of a feeling of fun getaway, because there was about taking your family for a getaway kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I remember that campaign. I was just stunned. The other thing that stunned me is my favorite thing about Paris when I first arrived was you get these ham and cheese sandwiches on the sidewalk from a little cart, kind of like the hot dog carts in New York.
Yeah.
And it's a slice of baguette. It's a thin bit of perfect ham and a little bit of Gruyere cheese, what we call Swiss cheese.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just ham, Swiss, and butter on a baguette, and it's perfect. Yes, it is perfect.
I don't even like ham like this, and it sounds perfect.
It really was, and it was one of my favorite things. I had to do that every time I would go find a cart. It didn't matter which one; they were all awesome. Well, the American thing of we have to slather goo on sandwiches has crept into French culture. At least French business culture. It used to be when I would have a business meeting, I could get ham cheese with butter on it was called mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So I could order a mixed and I'd be happy. And then they started showing up with ham, cheese, butter, and some form of weird mayo. Like, what is this?
Well, I mean, yeah. Why mess with what's great? I am a big fan of condiments. That's like my favorite food group is condiments. That's a joke I like to make. But
interesting.
But butter is also a condiment. I'm like, it already has a condiment. Why would you add other than butter?
Well, that was my view, but apparently people like it. So hey, we're back to the cold spaghetti in the morning conversation.
Oh yeah.
The Roman said, "De gustibus non disputandum." There's no point in debating matters of taste.
Nope. Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any last thoughts on haiku or food or poetry in general?
Haikus, I sort of shied away from haiku for a long time. I didn't really start seriously attempting it until just maybe the past 5 or 6 years, honestly. And the reason was I didn't like any haikus I wrote. And they were kind of dull and just not very interesting and juvenile. Maybe not juvenile is not the right word. They weren't sophisticated anyway. And I took it as a challenge to step that up. So there's the challenge motivation coming in for me. And one of the things that happened was I started working at home again, and my wife would text me when she was heading home. And I could, after a while, I got bored of just texting yay or smiley face or whatever. So I decided I would write a haiku every time she texted heading home.
Oh, I love that. Oh my God, that's so sweet.
And most, and so I was dashing off these quick haikus. Sometimes I get stuck on one and she'd be almost home by the time I had it done and sent. Like she'd be reading it in the driveway as she got into the house. but that practice, did in fact force me to start getting better, and that motivated me to go study a little bit and read. And so that's been my haiku journey thus far, and I still have imposter syndrome about haiku. So I can't tell you how delighted I was that you found several, these haiku I'd written to be worthy to share with people. So that's been a big boost to my haiku confidence.
Good. I'm glad. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And it has been great spending part of my Saturday with you.
Likewise. It was really delightful. Thank you, Allison.
My thanks to Peter Schmidt for joining me on the podcast. And I have to say, re-listening to that 2 weeks after I recorded it, I was actually amazed in all of the directions that took. We really went into some, for me, fun places. And this was a pretty long episode. This might have been the longest one I've recorded, maybe the second longest, but either way, if you are still here, thank you for coming on that wild and rambling discussion with us. So just a reminder, this month I'll have a community blog post on the theme of harvest. Of course, food should be incorporated. I feel like that's implied, but it never hurts to say these things out loud. Submission is via Google form, which is in the show notes, and the deadline for that is 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, November 23rd. That's Central Time in the United States. So I hope that if you observe Halloween, you had a great one. I hope you ease into the rest of your autumn season. And actually, according to the haiku calendar, this week we move into winter. So however the seasons play out for you, I hope they are gentle and peaceful. Have a good day. Have a good week. Thank you for listening.